What happens when forbidden love collides with the cruelest system ever devised? When a plantation heiress discovers her heart belongs to the man her family owns. In 1798, on Thornfield Plantation outside Savannah, Georgia, Isabella Thornfield did the unthinkable. She fell in love with Marcus, her father's most trusted slave, and together they ignited a rebellion that would shake the foundations of the South. But love in chains comes with a price written in blood, betrayal, and impossible choices. This is the story of a woman who chose love over fortune, and a man who chose freedom over safety, and how their secret affair became the spark that set Savannah ablaze. Isabella Thornfield stood at her bedroom window watching Marcus load cotton bales onto the wagon, her heart pounding so hard she pressed her hand against her chest to steady it. 3 months. 3 months since she had first touched his hand while he helped her down from her carriage, and her world had tilted on its axis. Now she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but the way his eyes met hers when no one was looking, the way he whispered her name like a prayer when they stole moments together in the old tobacco barn. Her father's voice boomed from downstairs, discussing cotton prices with potential buyers from Charleston, completely unaware that his precious daughter was planning something that would destroy everything he had built. Isabella smoothed her silk dress and descended the mahogany staircase, each step bringing her closer to a decision that would change everything. Tonight, after the guests left and the house fell silent, she would tell Marcus what she had discovered in her father's study. Tonight, everything would begin. The afternoon dragged like molasses. Isabella served tea to the Charleston merchants, smiled at their compliments about her beauty, and listened to them debate which of their sons might make a suitable husband for the Thornfield heiress. Each word felt like a nail in a coffin she refused to occupy. When Mr. Blackwell suggested his eldest son Thomas would be delighted to court such a refined young lady, Isabella's cup rattled against its saucer. Her father beamed with pride, already counting the money such a union would bring. But Isabella's mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation she had overheard that morning between her father and the overseer. They were planning to sell Marcus to a sugar plantation in Louisiana. The papers were already drawn up. In 1 week, the man she loved would be gone forever, condemned to die cutting cane under the brutal Louisiana sun, unless she acted first. As evening approached and the last merchant departed, Isabella waited in her room until the house settled into its nightly rhythm. Her father retired to his study with his whiskey, her mother went to bed with her laudanum, and the servants finished their duties. Only then did Isabella slip out through the kitchen door, her heart hammering as she made her way across the moonlit yard to the quarters where Marcus waited. She found him sitting on the steps of his cabin, head in his hands, shoulders tense with worry. He looked up as she approached, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. "You heard," she whispered, kneeling beside him. He nodded, unable to speak. For a moment they simply held each other, two people caught in an impossible situation, love and desperation intertwining like the Spanish moss that draped the oak trees around them. "There's something else," Isabella said, pulling back to look at him. "Something you need to know." She had found the letters in her father's desk, correspondence with other plantation owners about a network of runaways, about plans to increase patrols, about fears of rebellion. But more importantly, she had found the list. Names of slaves her father suspected of planning revolt, with Marcus at the top. Her father wasn't just selling him. He was removing what he saw as a threat before it could spread. Marcus went very still. "How long do we have?" Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. 1 week, maybe less. They both knew what this meant. If they were going to act, if they were going to try to escape together or fight back, it had to be now. But escape meant leaving everything behind, and fighting back meant risking the lives of everyone in the quarters. The weight of the decision pressed down on them like the humid Georgia air. "There's more," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. "I found something else in his papers, a map. It shows the location of every patrol, every safe house used by slave catchers, every route they used to transport runaways back." Marcus looked at her sharply. With that information, a well-planned escape wouldn't just be possible, it would be likely. but it would also require help, organization, and trust from people who had every reason to suspect a white woman bearing gifts. "You don't understand what you're asking," Marcus said, his voice heavy with pain. "If we're caught, you'll be disowned, sent away somewhere to live in shame. If I'm caught, I'll be killed, slowly, and so will anyone who helps us." Isabella gripped his hands tighter. "And if we do nothing, you'll be dead in Louisiana within a year, and I'll be married to Thomas Blackwell, bearing his children and pretending I never loved you at all." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant call of a night bird. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice changed, harder. "Then we don't run alone, we take everyone who wants to go." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you saying?" Marcus stood, pulling her up with him, his eyes bright with something dangerous and determined. "I'm saying if we're going to risk everything, we might as well risk it for something bigger than just us." That night, in the safety of the old tobacco barn that had become their secret meeting place, Marcus revealed the truth Isabella had suspected but never dared to ask about. The rebellion had been in planning for months. Trusted slaves from 5 different plantations had been meeting, sharing information, stockpiling weapons stolen or improvised from farm tools. They had been waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity. Isabella's map and inside knowledge could be that opportunity. "But it's dangerous," Marcus warned her. "Not just for us, but for you especially. The moment you cross that line, there's no going back. You'll be branded a traitor to your own kind." Isabella looked at him steadily. "My own kind put you in chains. My own kind thinks they can buy and sell human beings like cattle. If that's treason, then I'll wear the label proudly." The next morning, Isabella woke to the sound of her mother's excited voice calling up the stairs. "Isabella, darling, the most wonderful news. Mr. Blackwell has sent word that Thomas will be arriving tomorrow to begin formal courtship." Isabella's blood ran cold. Tomorrow. The timeline had just collapsed. Whatever they were going to do, it had to happen tonight. She spent the day in a strange calm, helping her mother plan the dinner for Thomas Blackwell's visit, selecting her finest dress, arranging flowers as if preparing for a celebration instead of an escape. Every mundane detail felt surreal, like playing a role in a play when you knew the theater was about to burn down. Her mother chattered about wedding plans and grandchildren, completely oblivious to the fact that her daughter was planning to destroy everything she held dear. As the sun began to set, Isabella made her final preparations. She gathered what few valuables she could carry without suspicion, changed into her darkest dress, and wrote 2 letters. One to her parents, explaining her choice and begging their forgiveness. The other to Thomas Blackwell, releasing him from any obligation and wishing him happiness with someone who could love him as he deserved. She sealed both letters and left them on her dressing table, knowing they wouldn't be found until morning. The quarters were unusually quiet as Isabella made her way through the darkness, but as she approached the old tobacco barn, she could see the soft glow of candlelight through the gaps in the wooden boards. Inside, she found 12 people waiting. Marcus stood at the center, but around him were faces she recognized, and some she didn't. Field hands, house servants, even old Samuel from the stables, all of them looking at her with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion to desperate determination. "She's the one with the map?" asked a woman Isabella recognized as Mary, the head cook. Marcus nodded. Mary studied Isabella for a long moment before speaking again. "You know what you're asking of us. You know what happens if this fails." Isabella met her gaze steadily. "I know, but I also know what happens if we do nothing. Marcus will be sold, others will follow, and all of us, in our different ways, will remain prisoners." The meeting that followed was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. These people, who her father dismissed as property, revealed themselves to be strategists, planners, and warriors. They had been watching patrol patterns, identifying weaknesses in the plantation's defenses, and establishing contacts with free blacks in Savannah who could provide safe houses. Isabella's map was the final piece of a puzzle they had been assembling for months. But as the plans took shape, Isabella began to understand the true scope of what was about to unfold. This wasn't just an escape. It was a carefully orchestrated rebellion designed to free not just the slaves of Thornfield Plantation, but those of the neighboring estates as well. By morning, if all went according to plan, over 200 people would be moving through the Georgia countryside toward freedom. And standing in opposition would be every slave patrol, every militia unit, and every plantation owner between Savannah and the Florida border. "Are you certain?" Marcus asked her one final time as the group prepared to disperse and make their final preparations. Isabella looked around at the faces surrounding her, people who had trusted her with their lives and their dreams of freedom. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered if either of them would survive to see the sunrise. The first gunshot shattered the pre-dawn silence at exactly 4:30 in the morning, but by then Isabella and Marcus were already 3 miles away, leading a column of 47 people through the pine forests toward the Ogeechee River. The shot came from Thornfield Plantation, where Overseer Jake Morrison had discovered the empty quarters and raised the alarm. But Morrison's bullet found only empty air. The people he was hunting had vanished like smoke, following trails that had been scouted for weeks and marked with symbols only they could read. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the distant sound, knowing it meant her old life was officially over. Behind them, dogs would soon be released, and patrol riders would fan out across the countryside like a deadly net. But ahead lay the river crossing, and beyond that, the first safe house. If they could reach it before the sun rose high enough for the patrols to track them effectively, they had a chance. If not, they would all be dead or worse by nightfall. Mary, the cook who had initially questioned Isabella's commitment, moved up beside her as they navigated through a particularly dense thicket. "You holding up, child?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella nodded, though her legs were already aching, and her fancy boots were proving completely inadequate for this kind of travel. She had never walked more than a mile in her life, and they had 12 miles to cover before they could rest. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that worried her most. It was the sound that had started about 20 minutes after the gunshot. Hoofbeats, still distant but getting closer. The slave patrols had mobilized faster than anyone had expected, and they were coming hard. Marcus called a halt and gathered the group leaders around him. In the dim moonlight filtering through the pine needles, Isabella could see the tension in every face. "They're closing ground faster than we planned," Marcus said quietly. "We need to split up." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Splitting up meant she might never see him again. It meant trusting their carefully laid plans to hold together even when they couldn't communicate. But it also meant a better chance for at least some of them to survive. The math was brutal but clear. Old Samuel raised a gnarled hand. "Where's the nearest crossing point if we split?" Marcus had memorized every detail of Isabella's stolen map. 2 miles northwest there's a shallow ford. Rocky bottom, good footing, but it's also the most obvious route. They'll expect us to use it. He paused, meeting Isabella's eyes in the darkness. "The other option is the Mill Pond Dam. Harder to cross, but they might not think to check it until later." The decision was made quickly. Samuel would lead the larger group, including the families with children, to the obvious crossing. They would leave a clear trail, drawing the patrols away from the real escape route. Marcus would take a smaller group, including Isabella, to the dam crossing. It was more dangerous, but if they made it across, they would have hours of head start while the patrols focused on the decoy group. As the two groups prepared to separate, Isabella felt someone grab her arm. It was Mary, pressing something small and hard into her palm. "For luck," the older woman whispered. Isabella looked down to see a small wooden carving worn smooth by countless hands. It was a bird in flight, wings spread wide. "My grandmother made that," Mary said. "Said it would help folks find their way to freedom. Seems like you might need it more than me right now." The emotion that flooded through Isabella at that moment nearly overwhelmed her. Here was a woman who had every reason to distrust her, giving her a family heirloom at the moment of greatest danger. "I can't take this," Isabella whispered back. Mary smiled, the first genuine smile Isabella had seen from her. "Child, you already took something much more valuable from us. You took our fear. Least I can do is give you something to remember us by." The separation was agonizing. Watching Samuel lead 27 people toward what might be their deaths, knowing they were doing it to give the rest a chance at freedom, broke something inside Isabella she didn't know could break. Children who should have been sleeping in their beds were walking into the darkness, trusting adults to keep them safe in a world designed to destroy them. And she was part of the reason they were all in danger. Marcus seemed to sense her thoughts. As they picked their way through the forest toward the dam, he moved closer to her. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, not unkindly. Isabella shook her head. "No, but I'm having first thoughts about what we've really done. Those children, Samuel, Mary's family, if they're caught because of my map, because of my information." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Listen to me," he said, his voice fierce but quiet. "Those people were already living in danger every day of their lives. Every morning they woke up not knowing if they'd be sold, beaten, or killed before sunset. You didn't create that danger. You just gave them a chance to fight back against it." His words should have been comforting, but Isabella could hear the doubt in his own voice. He was as terrified as she was, just better at hiding it. The sound of the hoofbeats was getting closer now, accompanied by the baying of bloodhounds. Isabella had never heard anything more terrifying in her life than those dogs howling through the forest, following the scent of human fear and desperation. Every instinct screamed at her to run faster, but Marcus kept the pace steady. Running blindly through the forest in the dark was more dangerous than the patrols, at least for now. They reached the Mill Pond Dam just as the eastern sky began to show the first hints of gray. The structure was older than Isabella had expected, built from rough-hewn logs and held together with iron bands that had rusted brown with age. Water poured through gaps between the logs, creating a constant roar that would mask their movements but also prevent them from hearing approaching riders. It was a gamble within a gamble. Marcus tested the first log, checking its stability before committing his full weight. The wood was slippery with moss and spray, treacherous even for someone with good balance and experience. For Isabella, wearing a dress and boots designed for parlor floors, it would be nearly impossible. But impossible had become a word she was learning to ignore. She was halfway across when she heard the shout behind them. "There, by the dam!" Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice. Jake Morrison, the overseer who had discovered their escape, had somehow tracked them to this exact spot. Either their trail had been easier to follow than they thought, or someone had betrayed them. Neither possibility offered any comfort. "Keep going," Marcus shouted over the roar of the water. "Don't look back." But Isabella couldn't help herself. She turned to see Morrison and two other men on horseback at the edge of the clearing, rifles raised. In the growing light, she could see Morrison's face clearly, twisted with rage and something that might have been personal satisfaction. He had always resented her family's wealth and status. Now he had the chance to bring down the high and mighty Thornfield daughter. The first shot splintered the log beside Isabella's foot, sending splinters of wood flying into the churning water below. She stumbled, caught herself, and forced her legs to keep moving. Behind her, she could hear Marcus shouting something, but the words were lost in the noise of the water and her own panic. The second shot was closer, close enough that she felt the heat of the bullet as it passed her cheek. She was almost to the other side when her foot slipped. For a terrifying moment she was falling, the dark water rushing up to meet her, certain she was about to drown or be swept away by the current. Then strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her up onto the muddy bank on the far side of the dam. Marcus had made it across and was pulling her to safety, his face grim with determination and fear. But their escape came at a cost. As they stumbled away from the dam into the forest on the far side, Isabella heard Morrison's voice carrying clearly across the water. "I know who you are, Isabella Thornfield. I know your face. You can run to the ends of the earth, but I'll find you. And when I do, you'll wish you'd never been born." The hatred in his voice was so pure it made her physically sick. They ran then, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the dam before Morrison could find a way across. The other members of their group had scattered when the shooting started, following the predetermined plan to meet at the first safe house if separated. Whether any of them had made it was impossible to know. As the sun climbed higher and the forest began to steam with humidity, Isabella and Marcus finally stopped to rest beside a small creek. They were both exhausted, covered in mud and scratches, their clothes torn by thorns and branches. Isabella's fine dress was ruined beyond repair, but she found she didn't care. Clothes were just things, and things could be replaced. Lives couldn't. "How much farther?" she asked, splashing creek water on her face to wash away the sweat and grime. Marcus consulted the stolen map, trying to orient himself by the position of the sun. "Maybe 5 miles to the first safe house, but we need to be careful. Morrison saw your face clearly. By now every patrol between here and Savannah will have your description." Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the creek water. She had known intellectually that crossing the line would make her a fugitive, but hearing it stated so plainly brought the reality home. She was no longer Isabella Thornfield, plantation heiress. She was Isabella Thornfield, escaped criminal, worth more dead or alive than most of the people she was trying to help. The irony wasn't lost on her. As they continued their journey through the pine forests and swamplands of coastal Georgia, Isabella began to understand what Marcus had tried to warn her about. This wasn't an adventure or a romantic gesture. It was a desperate fight for survival against people who would kill them without hesitation if caught. Every snapping twig could be a pursuer. Every bird call could be a signal. Every shadow could hide death. But something else was happening too, something she hadn't expected. With each mile they put between themselves and Thornfield Plantation, she felt lighter. Not physically. Her body ached in ways she had never imagined possible. But emotionally, spiritually, she felt as though weights she hadn't known she was carrying were falling away. For the first time in her life, she was making her own choices, following her own path, accepting the consequences of her own decisions. They reached the edge of a large clearing just as the sun reached its zenith. Through the trees, Isabella could see a small cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. The first safe house. But between them and safety lay 100 yards of open ground with no cover. If patrols were watching the house, crossing that clearing would be suicide. But staying in the forest meant they would eventually be found by the dogs, which were still howling somewhere behind them. Marcus studied the clearing for a long time before speaking. "I see movement in the cabin. Could be our contact, could be a trap." He looked at Isabella seriously. "This is your last chance to turn back. Once we cross that clearing, once we enter that house, you'll be committed fully. There will be no story you can tell, no family connection that will protect you. You'll be just another runaway slave in the eyes of the law." Isabella looked at the cabin, then back at Marcus, then down at the wooden bird carving Mary had given her. The bird's wings were spread wide, caught forever in the moment of flight. "I've been committed since the moment I fell in love with you," she said quietly. "The only difference now is that the whole world knows it." Marcus smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him since this all began. "Then let's go claim our freedom." The cabin door opened before they reached it, and Isabella's heart nearly stopped when she saw who emerged. Thomas Blackwell stood in the doorway, the man who was supposed to arrive at Thornfield Plantation that very evening to begin courting her. For a moment, time seemed frozen as the three of them stared at each other across the clearing. Then Thomas stepped aside and motioned them quickly inside, his face grim but not hostile. "Your father sent word ahead to every plantation owner in 3 counties," Thomas said without preamble as soon as the door closed behind them. "There's a $500 reward for your return, and $1,000 for information leading to the capture of what they're calling your Negro conspirators. Half the men in Georgia are saddling horses as we speak." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. $1,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. But Thomas wasn't finished. "What he doesn't know is that 3 other plantations were hit last night. Your rebellion worked better than you planned. Over 200 people are loose in the countryside right now, and the authorities are completely overwhelmed. Marcus stepped forward, his posture tense and ready for trouble. Why are you helping us? You're supposed to be courting her, not harboring fugitives. Thomas looked between them, and Isabella saw something in his eyes she had never expected to see. Respect. Because I've been waiting 3 years for someone to do exactly what you did, he said quietly. My family owned slaves, yes, but I've never believed it was right. I've been secretly funding the Underground Railroad for months, using my shipping business to move runaways north. When your father sent word about the reward, I knew I had to get here first. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. The man her parents had chosen for her, the man she had been prepared to sacrifice everything to avoid marrying, was an abolitionist. The irony was so bitter she almost laughed. But your family's wealth, your plantations, Thomas nodded grimly. Built on blood money, yes, but money can be used for good as well as evil. Every profit I make from those cursed fields goes toward buying freedom for others. A knock at the door interrupted them, and everyone froze. But the knock came in a pattern: 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. Thomas relaxed. That's Samuel. He opened the door to reveal the old man who had led the decoy group, supporting a young woman Isabella recognized as one of the field hands from a neighboring plantation. Both were exhausted and bleeding from scratches, but alive. How many made it? Marcus asked immediately. Samuel's face was grave. 18 of mine reached the river crossing. The patrols were waiting, but we scattered like we planned. Most got across, but we lost 3. Miller's boys caught them at the ford. The weight of those words settled over the cabin like a shroud. 3 people, dead because of their plan, because of their hope for freedom. But Samuel wasn't finished. The other plantations, though, word is spreading like wildfire. Slaves from 6 different estates have run off in the last 12 hours. The patrols can't be everywhere at once. Some are getting through. Isabella felt a strange mixture of hope and horror. Their rebellion was succeeding beyond their wildest dreams, but the cost in human lives was mounting with each passing hour. Thomas moved to a hidden panel in the cabin wall and withdrew a detailed map, far more comprehensive than the one Isabella had stolen from her father's study. This shows the current patrol positions as of this morning, he explained, spreading it on the rough wooden table. My contacts in the shipping business keep me informed. There's a clear corridor here, along the coast. If we move fast, we can get you to a ship I have waiting in Brunswick. Marcus studied the map carefully. How far? Thomas traced a route with his finger. 40 miles, 2 days hard travel if the weather holds, but there's a problem. He paused, looking directly at Isabella. The ship can take maybe 30 people safely, no more. We're going to have to choose who goes and who stays to try the overland route north. The decision that followed was the hardest thing Isabella had ever been part of. Families had to be split up. Young men had to stay behind to help others escape, while women and children took the limited spots on the ship. Elderly people like Samuel insisted on staying to help guide others rather than taking up precious space. Each choice felt like a small death, a piece of someone's heart torn away. Isabella was automatically assigned a spot on the ship, but she found herself hesitating. Maybe I should stay, she said quietly to Marcus. Help with the others who are still coming. Marcus shook his head firmly. You're the most recognizable fugitive in Georgia right now. Every patrol has your description. You staying helps no one and puts everyone at risk. The logic was sound, but it felt like cowardice. As preparations began for the journey to Brunswick, disturbing news arrived with each new group of escapees. The patrols weren't just capturing runaways anymore. They were taking revenge on anyone suspected of helping. 2 free black families had been burned out of their homes. A white minister who had been known to preach against slavery had been found beaten nearly to death. The rebellion Isabella and Marcus had started was spiraling into something larger and more violent than they had ever intended. This is what revolution looks like, Thomas said quietly as they prepared to leave the safe house under cover of darkness. It's never clean, never simple. People who never chose sides are forced to choose. People who tried to stay neutral are swept up in the current. His words offered no comfort, but they did offer perspective. They weren't just running away anymore. They were part of something that would reshape the entire region. The journey toward Brunswick was a nightmare of constant vigilance and heart-stopping scares. Twice, they had to hide in swamps while mounted patrols passed within yards of their hiding spots. Once they spent an entire day crammed into a false bottom of a wagon while the driver calmly transported them through a checkpoint. Isabella's dress, already ruined, became little more than rags. Her soft hands were cut and calloused from climbing and crawling. But she was changing in ways that went deeper than physical appearance. The entitled young woman who had lived in luxury while others suffered was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, more aware, more determined. When a young mother in their group collapsed from exhaustion, Isabella didn't hesitate to carry the woman's infant for hours. When food ran short, she gave up her portion without being asked. Marcus watched these transformations with something that might have been pride. On the second night, they were betrayed. A local farmer they had trusted to provide food and shelter instead sent word to the nearest patrol station. Isabella woke to the sound of barking dogs and shouting men surrounding the barn where they had sheltered. In the chaos that followed, their group of 23 scattered in all directions, each person following the desperate instinct to survive. Isabella found herself running through a tobacco field with Marcus, bullets whining past their heads, the dogs getting closer with every step. They reached a creek and plunged in, hoping the water would break their scent trail, but the current was stronger than expected. Isabella, who had never learned to swim properly, was swept downstream toward a tangle of fallen trees that could easily trap and drown her. Marcus dove after her without hesitation, fighting the current to reach her before she was swept into the deadly debris. He managed to grab her just as her head went under, pulling her to the surface and dragging her to the far bank. They lay there gasping and shivering as the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. They had escaped, but they were alone, separated from the others, with no idea if anyone else had survived. "The ship," Isabella gasped when she could finally speak. "We have to reach the ship." Marcus nodded, though they both knew their chances had dropped dramatically. They were still 15 miles from Brunswick. They had no food, no dry clothes, and no way to know if the patrols had figured out their destination. But they had come too far to give up now. They traveled the final stretch at night, moving through salt marshes and coastal forests that Isabella had never known existed. The landscape was alien and hostile, full of alligators, poisonous snakes, and quicksand that could swallow a person in minutes. But it was also beautiful in a wild way that made Isabella understand for the first time why someone would fight to remain free in such a place, rather than accept comfortable slavery. They reached Brunswick just as dawn was breaking over the Atlantic Ocean. The ship Thomas had promised was there, a sleek schooner flying French colors, but so were the patrols. The harbor was crawling with armed men checking every person who approached the docks. Getting aboard undetected would require a miracle, or a distraction large enough to draw attention away from the ship. The distraction came from an unexpected source. As Isabella and Marcus watched from the cover of a warehouse, a group of escapees from another plantation attempted to rush the ship. The patrols converged on them, leaving the rest of the harbor momentarily unguarded. Marcus squeezed Isabella's hand. "Now or never," he whispered. They ran. They made it halfway to the ship before someone spotted them. "There! The Thornfield girl!" The shout went up just as they reached the gangplank. Bullets splintered the wood around them as they scrambled aboard, crew members hauling them over the rail and shouting orders to cast off immediately. The ship lurched away from the dock just as the first patrol riders reached the harbor's edge. But their escape came at a terrible price. As the ship cleared the harbor and headed for open water, Isabella watched the chaos they were leaving behind. The other escapees who had provided their distraction were being captured or killed on the docks. Smoke was rising from several buildings in the town. The rebellion that had started with hope and love was ending in blood and fire. Standing at the ship's rail as the Georgia coast disappeared into the morning haze, Isabella felt Marcus's arm around her shoulders. They had achieved the impossible. They were free together and bound for a new life in a place where their love wouldn't be a crime. But the cost had been higher than either of them had imagined when they first touched hands beside her father's carriage. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Isabella looked down at the wooden bird carving Mary had given her, now worn smooth by her constant handling during their escape. The bird's wings were still spread wide, still caught in eternal flight. "I regret the pain we caused others," she said finally. "But I don't regret choosing love over law, freedom over comfort, truth over tradition." The French captain approached them as they stood watching their homeland disappear. "Mademoiselle, monsieur," he said in accented English, "you should know that word of your rebellion has spread beyond Georgia. There are those in the north who speak of you as heroes, and others in the south who have put a price on your heads that would make kings envious. You cannot return to America, perhaps not ever." Isabella nodded, understanding the finality of what they had done. They would never see their families again, never walk on American soil, never know if the seeds of rebellion they had planted would grow into something larger. But they would be together, and they would be free, and sometimes that had to be enough. Years later, living in a small coastal town in Nova Scotia, Isabella would tell their story to anyone who would listen. She became a writer, documenting the horrors of slavery and the courage of those who fought against it. Marcus became a respected member of the community, using his intelligence and determination to build a new life from nothing. They had 3 children who grew up free, who never knew the weight of chains or the sting of the overseer's whip. But they never forgot the price of their freedom, paid in the blood of friends and strangers alike. Every year on the anniversary of their escape, they would hold a quiet memorial for those who had died in the rebellion they sparked. And Isabella would hold Mary's wooden bird, remembering that freedom isn't free and love isn't safe, but both are worth fighting for even when the cost seems too high to bear. The rebellion of 1798 was largely erased from official histories, dismissed as a minor slave uprising quickly suppressed. But in the quarters and cabins throughout the South, the story lived on. They spoke of the white woman who chose love over privilege, and the slave who chose freedom over safety, and how their courage lit a fire that would eventually burn down the very system that created them. Isabella Thornfield became a legend whispered in the darkness, proof that sometimes love really can conquer all, even when all seems determined to conquer love.